My dear friends, what a blessing to be here, sharing a little bit of my story with you all. You know, when you reach my age, everything you've lived through feels like it happened just yesterday. My name is Rose Marie Williams Johnson, but everyone's called me Rose since I was little. I'm 78 years old now, born and raised in Oakfield, a small town in Pennsylvania where winters were bone-chilling, but people's hearts were always warm. Today I live on a small farm outside of Pittsburgh that my dear Joseph and I bought nearly 18 years ago. I have my little corner with my plants, my devotional items, and photos of my children and grandchildren spread throughout the living room. This house is simple, but there's plenty of joy and love inside, you know? I always say a grandmother's house should smell like fresh coffee and cornbread right out of the oven. In my daily life, I love waking up early with the birds singing. I make my coffee the old-fashioned way, just like my mother taught me. Then I tend to my plants. I have a small garden out back with all kinds of herbs. Would you believe the neighbors come here for my herbs when their grandchildren have upset stomachs or colds? I learned everything from my grandmother, who knew the power of each little leaf. In the afternoons, when the sun isn't so strong, I sit in my rocking chair on the porch to crochet. I only started crocheting at 60, did you know that? It's never too late to learn something new. At first my hands hurt and the stitches came out all crooked, but you get the hang of it. Now I make blankets, rugs, and baby clothes. I sell them at the church fair on Sundays. It's a little extra income that helps with expenses and keeps my mind active. Because staying idle, my children, is what makes us age faster. This crocheting story began after my Joseph went to heaven. It's been 16 years already. I felt so lost, so alone. It was my friend Betty who brought me some yarn and needles and said, "Rose, keep your head and hands busy, or sadness will take over." And wouldn't you know, she was right. Each stitch I made was like rebuilding a piece of my heart, and slowly, I learned to live again. I'm recording these stories right here in my kitchen, sitting at the same table where I knead my bread every week. I put a nice tablecloth that I embroidered, lit a candle, and brought us some coffee. It's as if you were here with me in this kitchen that smells of cinnamon and cloves, listening to the ticking of the old clock that belonged to my mother. Before I start telling you more about my life, I'd like to ask a little favor from the heart. If this story touches your heart, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You know why? Because that way other people can hear too and maybe find some comfort. Life isn't always easy, but when we share our sorrows and joys, the path becomes less heavy to walk. As my grandmother used to say, shared sorrow is half the sorrow. Shared joy is double the joy. Also, comment about where you're watching from. I'll read all your comments on this video. So my dear friends, I'll start by telling you about my childhood back in the 1940s, when the world was so different. We didn't have all this modern technology, no cell phones, no color television. We played outside, danced in the rain, picked fruit straight from the trees. But there were also things that hurt the soul, things that only now, at this age, I can understand and talk about. Have you ever heard that God writes straight with crooked lines? Well, in my life, it was like that. I had very difficult moments that you'll get to know in upcoming videos. But the Lord always placed an angel in my path when I needed one most. And today, looking back, I see that each scar taught me something. Each tear watered the strong person I became. Shall we go together on this journey through time? I promise to tell everything sincerely, even the difficult parts, because I believe our stories can help others find strength to move forward. As the saying goes, a story shared grows in the telling. But every little detail of this story is true, like the wrinkles on my face and the love in my heart. My dear friends, as promised, I'll tell you a bit about my childhood. I was born on a spring day in 1947, when the May flowers were all blooming in my parents' yard. That's why I got this name, Rose. My mother, Sarah, used to say I came into the world in a hurry, before the midwife could even arrive. Perhaps it was already a sign that I was eager to live. Our house was simple, wooden, with floorboards that creaked when we walked. We had a wood stove that stayed lit all day during winter, keeping the kitchen warm with the smell of smoke and good food. That's where the whole family gathered. The house was in a neighborhood outside Oakfield, where the streets were still dirt, and there was plenty of space between houses. My father, Oh, I never knew my father. My mother said he had gone to work far away, but with time, I understood that he simply left when he learned about the pregnancy. I grew up dreaming of a man in a hat who would one day come back for us. I made drawings of him, invented stories about where he might be. It was my little secret kept under my pillow. Even today, when I see an elderly man wearing a hat on the street, my heart skips a beat, as if I were still waiting for him. My father's absence meant my mother had to work twice as hard. She took in laundry, cleaned the big houses downtown, and still sewed at night by lamplight. Her hands were rough and cracked from the heavy work, but they were the most loving hands I ever felt on my face. I remember her singing while ironing, even when tired. "Things will get better someday, little flower," she always said. At 6, I started going to the little school. It was far. I walked almost an hour each day, crossing a field and a small wooden bridge over the creek. In winter, my feet got so cold inside my patched-up shoes that I could barely feel my toes. But I loved studying, learning letters and numbers. The teacher, Miss Patterson, said I was as clever as a fox, that I had a future. Those words were like treasure to me. At 8, our life changed. My mother met Mr. Thomas, who came to live with us. He worked at the textile factory and brought in a more steady income. At first, it was good. He brought candy for me on Fridays, and my mother smiled more. His presence made the house seem more protected, more complete. But time passed and things changed, like river water that gradually becomes murky. Mr. Thomas had a brother, Uncle Gerald, who started visiting our house. He was a quiet man with small eyes that seemed to examine everything. He brought presents for me, a rag doll, hair ribbons, colorful candies. Gradually, he got closer. First, it was just compliments. "What a pretty girl you're becoming, little Rose." Then came the touches on my hair, my shoulders. His visits always left me with a knot in my throat, a weight on my chest that I couldn't explain. When he arrived, I would run to the yard to play with my friend Betty, the neighbor's daughter, or hide in my secret spot behind the apple tree, where I had a little box buried with my treasures: seashells, colored stones, prayer cards. One day, I was alone at home doing my homework. My mother had gone to deliver some sewing, and Uncle Gerald showed up unexpectedly. He locked the door and, well, there are things that are hard to tell even after so many years. God knows what happened that afternoon. The sky suddenly darkened, as if even the clouds wanted to hide it. My little body was too small to endure so much pain. My soul was too innocent to understand that kind of evil. When my mother returned, I was huddled under the bed, shaking like a leaf. I told her, between sobs, what had happened. I thought she would hug me, protect me, bring justice, but her eyes filled with a rage I had never seen before. "You must have provoked him," she said coldly. "Shameless girl trying to get attention. If you tell anyone about this, they'll take you to a boarding school far away from me." It was as if a piece of me had died that day, not just because of what had happened, but because of the betrayal by the one who should have protected me. At school, my grades dropped. I was distracted, looking out the window, dreaming of running far away. The teacher called my mother, concerned. "She seems to be in another world," Miss Patterson said. My mother replied that I was just being lazy, neglecting my studies, that I needed discipline. At home, things got worse. Whenever Uncle Gerald visited, my mother found a way to leave me alone with him. "Go show your new notebook to your uncle," she'd say, pushing me into the room and closing the door. Those moments were like the whole world had stopped spinning, like the air had run out. I would transport myself to another place in my mind. I imagined I was flying like a free bird, far away from there. By 11, I was no longer that happy and dreamy little girl. I had learned to hide within myself, to trust no one. During stormy nights, when lightning cut across the sky, I prayed quietly, asking for lightning to strike our house and end it all. Or sometimes, in more desperate moments, I thought about simply walking down the road without looking back. It was around this time that I met Mrs. Wilson, a lady who sold herbs at the market. She noticed my sad look, my drooping shoulders with the weight I carried. One day, she called me to her stall. "Child," she said in a gentle voice, "you carry too much pain for someone so small." And she gave me a sprig of rosemary to put behind my ear. "For protection," she explained. It was the first time someone saw my pain without me having to say a word. Mrs. Wilson taught me about plants and their healing powers. When I could, I would sneak out to help her at the market. She told me stories of strong women who had gone through trials and come out stronger. Life sometimes breaks us into 1,000 pieces, she would say. But then we put ourselves back together like a mosaic, different, but even more beautiful because of the cracks. Those afternoons with Mrs. Wilson were like drops of water in the desert of my childhood. She gave me something I had never had. Hope. Hope that one day I could escape that situation, that life could be different. Keep that in your heart, child. She told me one day, no night is long enough for the sun not to rise again. And so was my childhood, my dear friends. Between shadows and some light, between the weight of stolen innocence and small moments of beauty that kept me alive, like flowers that grow in difficult terrain, I found ways to grow, even where it seemed impossible. But the journey was just beginning, and many challenges were still to come. The important thing is that today, looking back, I see that that little girl managed to survive. And that in itself is a victory I celebrate every day when I wake up. In the next part, I'll tell you about my teenage years, the dreams I cultivated in secret, and how an unexpected encounter changed the course of my story. Continuing our conversation, my dear friends, now I'll tell you about my teenage years. These years, which for many are times of beautiful discoveries, for me were times of survival and keeping dreams in secret, like someone keeping seeds waiting for the right season to plant. At 13, my body started to change, and that only made my situation at home worse. My mother looked at me with suspicion, as if I were doing something wrong just by growing up. "You're trying to draw attention with that body, aren't you?" she would say when I wore any clothing that wasn't 2 sizes too big. So I started hiding in baggy clothes, walking hunched over, trying to take up less space in the world. Uncle Gerald kept coming around, and the situation remained the same. But now I had developed techniques to deal with it, learning to leave my body, to transport myself far away during those moments. In my head, I imagined being on a beach I had seen in a magazine with blue waves and white sand, or in a field, running among colorful flowers. It was my way of surviving. At school, I took refuge in my studies. Books became my best friends, my way of escaping that reality. The library was my sanctuary. The librarian, Mrs. Cecilia, always saved the new books for me. "This girl devours books," she would proudly say to the other teachers. Little did they know that each page turned was a minute when I could live another life, be another person. It was around this time that I wrote my first poem. It was simple, about a bird that dreamed of flying beyond the mountain. Mrs. Cecilia read it, and her eyes sparkled. "You have a gift, Rose," she said. That compliment stayed in my heart like a precious treasure. At 15, I started working after school at a bakery downtown. I would wake up at 5 in the morning, help clean and arrange the display cases before going to class. In the afternoon, I would return to work the counter until dusk. It was exhausting, but every penny I earned was kept in a cookie tin, hidden under a loose floorboard in my room. That money represented my future freedom. The bakery owner, Mrs. Murphy, was a strong-voiced Irish woman with an even bigger heart. She noticed my situation without me having to say a word. "Girl, you're not eating right," she commented one day. And from then on, she always set aside a package with bread and cakes for me to take home. Sometimes, when I arrived looking very downcast, she would sit me in the back kitchen and serve me hot chocolate. "Drink this. It sweetens life," she would say with her thick accent. It was Mrs. Murphy who encouraged me to keep studying. "Education is the only thing no one can take from you, girl. It's your passport to a better life." And I held on to those words like a shipwreck survivor clings to a piece of wood in the high seas. At home, things remained difficult. Mr. Thomas, my mother's husband, started drinking more than normal. He would come home late, smelling of whiskey and with a sour mood. Anything was a reason to yell, to break things. My mother, who was already hard on me, became even more bitter. It was as if she had given up on life, given up on being happy. At 16, I went through a moment that almost destroyed me. After one of the episodes with Uncle Gerald, I discovered I was pregnant. My world collapsed. I had no one to talk to, didn't know what to do. Despair took over. I thought about running away, thought about ending it all. I even went to the bridge over the river on a rainy night. I stood there looking at the dark water rushing below, feeling the rain mix with my tears. That's when I heard a voice. "Miss, what are you doing out there in all this rain?" It was an elderly man with an old umbrella. I don't know why, but I started crying even harder and told him everything. A complete stranger. He listened without judging. Then he took me to the nearby church. He was the caretaker, Mr. Mitchell. He introduced me to Sister Margaret, a nursing nun who cared for the sick in the poor neighborhood. She took me to a support home run by the church, where I stayed for a few weeks. There, unfortunately, I lost the baby. My young, weak body, added to the stress and conditions, couldn't handle it. I felt a mixture of relief and deep sadness. Sister Margaret held my hand throughout the process. "This little angel will watch over you from heaven," she whispered as I cried. When I returned home, I told my mother I had been sick and stayed at a school friend's house. She pretended to believe, perhaps out of convenience, perhaps not wanting to face the truth, but something had changed inside me. That experience, as painful as it was, lit a flame of determination. I realized I needed to fight for my life, that no one would do it for me. I started planning my exit from that house. I worked more hours at the bakery, saved every penny. Mrs. Murphy, noticing my dedication, gave me a raise. "You're worth gold, girl," she would say. In my free time, I would sew small jobs that Sister Margaret arranged for me. Pillows, small towels, mending clothes. At 17, my life took an unexpected turn. A young man started coming to the bakery every morning. He was tall, with a shy smile, always polite. His name was Joseph. He worked at the auto repair shop across the street and would come for coffee before starting his shift. At first, we barely exchanged words. He would ask for a coffee with milk and a buttered roll, and I would serve in silence. Over time, Joseph started making conversation. He would ask about the weather, about the pastries in the display case, about how my day had been. It was strange for me to have someone interested in my life, in how I felt. I opened up slowly, like a flower that takes time to bloom after a long winter. One day, Joseph invited me to go to the movies on Sunday. I was so surprised that I dropped the tray with cups. Mrs. Murphy laughed at the scene. "Go, girl. Life is for living," she encouraged me as she helped me pick up the pieces. I made up an excuse at home, saying I was going to help at the church fair. It was the first time I did something just for me, something that gave me joy. At the movies, we watched a romantic film. Joseph didn't try anything, just held my hand in the darkness of the theater. A simple gesture, but for me it meant respect, affection, things I had never experienced with a man. After the movie, we walked through the park. Joseph told me about his dreams of having his own repair shop one day, of building a family. He talked about his childhood in the countryside, about his hard-working parents, his younger brothers. It was a world so different from mine, so full of normality and affection. When he left me at home, Joseph said something that changed my life. "Rose, you deserve good things. Never forget that." It was the first time someone told me I deserved kindness, that I deserved to be happy. I cried all night after that, but they were different tears. Tears of someone who begins to see a light at the end of the tunnel. In the following weeks, Joseph and I met more times. He was patient, respectful, never pressured me. Gradually, I trusted him enough to tell him some pieces of my story. Not everything. There were wounds too deep to be exposed, but enough for him to understand why I was so cautious, so frightened sometimes. Instead of pulling away, Joseph got closer. "I want to protect you, Rose. I want to show you that not all men are like that." And that's exactly what he did. Day after day, gesture after gesture. When I turned 17 and a half, Joseph made me a request that seemed crazy. "Come with me to Pittsburgh. My cousin is going to open a repair shop there and invited me to work with him. We can start a new life far from here." My heart raced. It was scary, but at the same time, it was exactly what I wanted most in the world. To start over, breathe new air, leave all that suffering behind. I thought about the risks, of course. I barely knew Joseph well, and Pittsburgh was a big city, intimidating for someone like me. But then I thought about the alternative. staying in that house with that life that was destroying me little by little. It wasn't really a difficult choice. I told my plans to Mrs. Murphy and Sister Margaret. Both were concerned, but understood. "Sometimes courage is needed to seek happiness," said the nun, giving me a small medal of the Virgin Mary. "She will protect you." On the eve of departure, I packed my small suitcase with the few clothes I had, my poetry notebooks, the tin with the money I had saved, and an old photo of my grandmother, the only person in the family who had truly loved me. I left a simple note for my mother. "I went to find my path. Maybe one day you'll understand." And so, on a cold May dawn, I boarded the bus to Pittsburgh, beside Joseph. As the town I knew was left behind, I looked out the window and saw the sun rising on the horizon. It was as if the sky was telling me that a new day was finally beginning in my life. There on that rickety bus, at 17.5 years old, and with a heart full of fear and hope, I didn't know what the future held for me. I just knew that, for the first time, I was taking the reins of my own story. And that, my dear friends, was already quite a victory for that girl who once dreamed of being as free as the birds. The arrival in Pittsburgh was a shock for me. I had never seen so many buildings, so many cars, so many people walking hurriedly. It was 1965, and the city was growing, modernizing. It had a completely different rhythm from what I knew. At first, I felt lost, like a fish out of water. Joseph and I went to live in a simple boarding house in the North Side neighborhood. It was a small room with a bed, an old wardrobe, and a small table. The bathroom was shared with other residents. For a girl raised in a small town, it was almost an insult to privacy. But I was so happy to be away from my past that I even found humor in the difficulties. In the first few days, Joseph started working at his cousin's repair shop. I began looking for a job. It was harder than I imagined. "What experience do you have?" they would ask. And what could I say? That I knew how to serve at a bakery counter, that I had learned to sew with a nun, didn't seem very impressive. After many closed doors, I got a job at a clothing factory. The pay was little, the conditions were harsh, but it was a start. I spent the whole day bent over the sewing machine, with fingers full of needle pricks and an aching back. But you know what's curious? I felt happy because it was my choice to be there, because every cent I earned was the fruit of my honest effort. At 19, Joseph and I got married. It was a simple ceremony at the neighborhood church, with few guests, just co-workers and some neighbors from the boarding house who had become friends. I didn't invite anyone from my family. That chapter was closed, or at least I believed it was. With much sacrifice, we managed to rent a small house on the outskirts of the city. It was small, in need of repairs, but it was ours. We painted the walls, fixed the roof, planted flowers in the small yard. Each improvement was celebrated as a great victory. At night, sitting on the improvised porch, we made plans for the future. Joseph talked about opening his own repair shop one day. I dreamed of going back to study. It wasn't easy, my dear friends. Money was always tight. We worked from sunrise to sunset. We had moments of doubt, moments when fatigue seemed greater than the dream, but we had something no one could take from us. The certainty that we were building something good, something clean, something ours. At 20, I discovered I was pregnant. It was a mix of joy and terror. Joy for that new life. Terror because of the memories from the past that still haunted me. Joseph noticed my fear and hugged me for hours, promising it would be different, that our child would be loved and protected. The pregnancy was difficult. I had to stop working at the factory because of the chemicals in the fabrics. I started making cakes and sweets at home to sell. Joseph worked overtime at the repair shop. We slept little, worried a lot, but we moved forward one day at a time. Our first son, John, was born on a rainy winter dawn. It was a complicated, lengthy delivery. When I finally held him in my arms, I cried like I had never cried before. It wasn't just the emotion of being a mother. It was the cycle that was breaking. Here was a child who would be loved, protected, respected. With John, I felt that I was somehow redeeming that other baby I lost, that I was healing the wounded girl I once was. Motherhood transformed me. Suddenly, I discovered a strength I didn't know I had. For John, I would be capable of facing the whole world. I woke up several times during the night, breastfed, rocked, changed diapers, and still found energy to make my sweets, take care of the house, be a wife. When John was 2 years old, I managed to fulfill a dream. I went back to study. I enrolled in the night course to complete high school. Joseph would stay with the boy while I went to school. Sitting at that desk, at 22 years old among teenagers, I felt strange, out of place. But the thirst for knowledge was greater than the shame. The teachers soon noticed my dedication. I devoured the books, did all the lessons, participated in the classes. The English teacher, Mrs. Howard, was especially impressed with my compositions. "You have a gift for storytelling, Rose," she would say, and lent me books from her personal collection. It was Mrs. Howard who encouraged me to write my first short story. It was the story of a girl who planted flowers in unlikely places, cracks in the asphalt, old cans, abandoned walls, the flowers of hope, I called it. When I read it to the class, everyone fell silent, then applauded. It was the first time I felt truly seen for what I could create, not for what had been done to me. At 23, our second child, Anne, came. Unlike her brother, who was calm and observant, Anne was born in a hurry and with noise. She was agitated, curious, determined. "She takes after her mother," Joseph would say proudly. Seeing my 2 children growing up healthy and happy was the greatest blessing I could ask for. At this time, I started selling my sweets to some downtown diners. The cornbread, coconut cookies, and puddings were a success. Soon, I was receiving orders for parties, baptisms, weddings. I set up a small kitchen in the back of the house with a better oven, proper utensils. It was the beginning of what years later would become my own business. At 24, I faced one of the biggest challenges of my adult life. I received a letter from my mother. Someone from my past had discovered my address and passed it on to her. The letter was brief, cold. It said that Mr. Thomas had died, that she was sick, alone. She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't show remorse, just informed that things were difficult. I spent days without sleeping, not knowing what to do. Joseph respected my silence, my confusion. "Whatever your decision, I'll be by your side," he said. I looked at my children, at the life I had built, and made the most difficult decision. I replied to the letter. I didn't promise to return. I didn't open my heart completely. I just said that I was well, that I had a family, that I was sorry about Mr. Thomas, and I sent some money, what I could. It was the most I could offer at that moment. In the following months, we exchanged some sporadic letters. They were superficial, cautious, but it was a beginning, a small thread connecting a painful past to a present in reconstruction. I still wasn't ready to forgive completely. Maybe I never would be, but I was learning that forgiveness isn't so much for the other, but for ourselves. At 25, I completed high school with excellent grades. The graduation was one of the happiest days of my life. Joseph was there with John and Anne, all dressed in their best clothes. When they called my name to receive the diploma, I heard my son shouting, "That's my mom! My mom is a graduate." That moment crystallized everything I had fought for, the right to be respected, to be proud of myself, to show my children that we can overcome any obstacle with determination and honesty. The young woman who once fled home with fear and hope now was a woman, mother, wife, student, worker. I had scars, yes, some visible, others hidden deep in the soul, but I also had achievements, small and big daily victories that were rebuilding my confidence in the world and in people. And above all, my dear friends, I had learned the most valuable lesson, that we are much more than what was done to us. We are what we choose to be with each new dawn, with each decision, with each act of courage. My dear friends, when you reach 26, you're no longer that dreamy young girl, but you're also not yet an experienced lady. It's a time of building, of foundations, of making choices that will define the rest of your life. And that's how it was with me. With the money from the sweet orders growing, I managed to rent a small space in the Pittsburgh public market. It was a tiny stand, barely enough room for me and my helper, Marlene, but it was my first real business. I called it Rose's Sweets and painted the sign with colorful flowers around it. I would wake up at 4 in the morning to prepare everything fresh. Puddings, cornbread, coconut cookies, pies. The line that formed at lunchtime warmed my heart with pride. Joseph, my husband, was also prospering. After years working at his cousin's repair shop, he managed to save enough to open his own garage. It was a simple shed at the entrance to the neighborhood, with basic tools, but customers soon started to appear because they knew they would find honest work and fair prices there. Our children were growing strong and smart. John, so quiet and observant, always with a book in hand. Anne, a little whirlwind of energy, climbing trees, bringing home stray animals, asking 1,000 questions. I tried to be for them the mother I never had, present, loving, firm when needed, but always respecting who they were. At 30, we faced our first major crisis. Joseph suffered an accident at the garage. A car fell from the hydraulic lift and nearly crushed him. He was left with a severely injured leg. He needed 3 surgeries and spent months unable to work. It was a time of hardship, of sleepless nights, worried about the bills, about the future. But you know what's funny about life? Sometimes, the most difficult moments bring opportunities we hadn't even imagined. With Joseph at home recovering, he started helping me with the accounting for Rose's sweets. He had a way with numbers that I didn't. Soon we were reorganizing everything, planning better, thinking about growing. That's when the chance came to buy a small house very close to the market. It was old, needing renovation, but it had a perfect space to set up a professional kitchen. We gathered all our savings, took out a loan from the bank, my first time signing such important papers, and took the big leap. The first months were a lot of work. Joseph, still limping from the accident, oversaw the renovation while I kept the stand running. The children helped as they could after school, John organizing the recipes in a neat notebook, Anne charming the customers with her talkative way. It was a daily struggle, but we were together in it. When we finally inaugurated the Rose's Bakery, I was 32 years old. It wasn't much, a few tables, a refrigerated display case, the kitchen in the back, but to me, it was a palace. We put a lace tablecloth on each table, fresh flowers in a little vase, and the aroma of sweets coming from the oven attracted people passing by on the street. Soon, I needed to hire more helpers. The neighborhood ladies, many of them alone after their children had grown up, found in my kitchen a place to share their family recipes, their stories, their laughter. Mrs. Jenkins with her shortbread cookies that melted in your mouth. Mrs. Olson with the banana cake she learned from her German grandmother. Mrs. Williams with her creamy milk puddings. It was more than a business, it was a community. At 35, I received news that my mother was very sick. Cancer, in an advanced stage. I was torn between the resentment I still carried and my duty as a daughter. Joseph, always my safe harbor, said, "Rose, don't go for her. Go for yourself to make peace with your past." The trip back to Oakfield was like going back in time. The town had changed, grown, but the memories were on every corner. My childhood home seemed smaller, sadder, and my mother was barely recognizable in that thin, yellowed, huddled woman in the bed. There were no dramatic reconciliations, my dear friends. Life isn't like in the soap operas. There were uncomfortable silences, some held back tears, small gestures of care. I stayed for a week, cleaned the house, cooked, hired a lady to take care of her, and left money for the medicine. Before leaving, she held my hand with surprising strength and said, "You became strong, unlike me." It was the closest to an acknowledgement I ever received from her. 3 months later, I received news of her passing. I cried, yes, but not so much for the mother I had, but for the mother I could have had, for the relationship that never blossomed. Grief is like that. Sometimes we cry for what we didn't live, as much as for what we lost. Life went on. The bakery thrived, now with a loyal clientele, including orders for important city parties. John, at 16, showed interest in pursuing an academic career. He wanted to be a teacher, he said with shining eyes. Anne, at 14, had a gift for the arts. She drew everything she saw, dreamed of working with creation. At 40, I experienced one of my greatest joys. John was accepted to study history at the university. He was the first in the family to enter college. On the day of enrollment, when we walked together through the corridors of that imposing building, I remembered the girl I was, who dreamed of books and knowledge and felt that somehow I was fulfilling that dream through my son. But life has its ups and downs, doesn't it? At 42, I faced a health problem that scared me a lot. I started feeling chest pains, shortness of breath. The doctors discovered a heart problem. It wasn't serious, but I would need care for the rest of my life. Medication, regular exams, changes in diet. It was a time of deep reflection. I realized I was working too much, carrying too many worries, wanting to control everything. Joseph told me with that simple wisdom he always had. The bakery is to serve our life, not the other way around. So I decided to take a step back, delegate more, trust others more. I hired a manager for the bakery, Susie, daughter of Mrs. Jenkins, who had the same gift for sweets and a business acumen that I admired. I reduced my hours in the kitchen, started dedicating myself more to creating new recipes, the part that really gave me pleasure. This free time allowed me to resume my studies. At 44, I enrolled in a culinary course. I, who learned everything in practice, now studying techniques, food history, flavor combinations. I was the oldest student in the class, but also the most enthusiastic. At 45, our Anne surprised us. She was pregnant, not married. The boyfriend didn't want to take responsibility. It was an initial shock, I confess. We came from a generation with other values, other customs, but I looked at my daughter, so young and frightened as I once was, and I knew exactly what not to do. Instead of judgment, we offered support. Instead of shame, we celebrated the new life that would come. My first grandchild, Peter, was born in a spring like me. A smiling little boy with curious eyes like his mother. Anne showed a strength that filled me with pride. She finished her design studies with the baby in her arms. She started working from home as a freelance illustrator. She was a mother and professional with the same dedication. At 48, I fulfilled another dream, publishing a cookbook. Sweet memories, recipes that tell stories. It brought together not only the bakery recipes, but the stories behind them. The cornbread from my childhood, the coconut cookies I learned from Mrs. Wilson, the pudding I made to celebrate the birth of my children. It was a way to preserve not just the flavors, but the feelings, the memories. The book launch was at the bakery itself, with a line that went around the block. People I didn't even know came to hug me, to tell how my sweets had been part of important moments in their lives. Weddings, baptisms, graduations. I realized then that I had built more than a business. I had created a little piece of happiness in many people's lives. At 50, Joseph and I celebrated our silver anniversary, 25 years of marriage. We had a simple party in the backyard of our home with the children, the little grandson, the closest friends. I looked at that man, now with gray hair at the temples and expression lines around the eyes, and felt the same love as the first day, only more mature, deeper. That night, sitting on the porch after everyone had left, Joseph took my hand and asked, "If you could go back, would you do everything the same?" I thought about the frightened girl I was, the tortuous path I had traveled, the scars I carried, but also the joys, the achievements, the love I found. I wouldn't change anything, I answered sincerely, because each step, even the painful ones, brought me here, to you, to our children. And so, my dear friends, I reached the halfway point of my journey. A 50-year-old woman with hands marked by work, a body transformed by motherhood, a heart scarred by losses, but eyes still shining with hope. Because life, however difficult it may be sometimes, always offers us a new chance to bloom, like my name, like the May flowers that bloom even after the harshest winter. They say that after 50, we begin to reap what we've sown. And it's true, my dear friends. It was a time to see the fruits ripening, to accompany the growth of new generations, but also to face the losses that inevitably come with age. At 51, Rose's Bakery was already a reference in the city. We now had 2 units, the original near the market and a new one in the shopping center that had opened in the North Zone. I was no longer in the day-to-day operations, but I continued creating new recipes, training the team, maintaining the quality standard that was our trademark. John, my oldest son, was now 31, a university professor, married to Beatrice, a dedicated doctor he met during college. Anne, at 29, had her own design studio and created illustrations for children's books, besides taking care of Peter, who was already 5 years old and was the joy of my days. It was around this time that I began to feel the need to give back a little of what life had given me. I started a social project at the bakery, free culinary courses for women in vulnerable situations. I remembered how the knowledge of making sweets had been my lifeline and wanted to offer this same opportunity to other women who, like me, needed a chance. The Sweet New Beginning project started small, a class of 6 students using the bakery kitchen on days off. Soon it grew. We gained a space of our own donated by a customer. We got sponsorship from suppliers. Seeing those women, many of them with stories as harsh as mine, finding a new purpose, a source of income, a support community, was a satisfaction that no commercial success could match. At 54, John and Beatrice gave me my second grandchild, Michael, a serene boy like his father. With 2 grandchildren, life gained a new dimension. Peter, now 8 years old, loved playing the role of big brother to Michael, even though they were cousins. The two were inseparable at Sunday lunches. At 57, I received a diagnosis that changed my perspective: breast cancer. The doctor was kind, but direct. It would be a long, difficult treatment, with no guarantees. I felt fear, of course, but also a fierce determination to fight. I hadn't come this far, overcome so many obstacles to give up now. The treatment was like a storm that devastates everything. The surgery, the chemotherapy that took my hair and my energy, the radiation that burned my skin. Joseph was by my side at every step, holding my hand on nights of pain, reading to me when my eyes were too tired, reminding me who I was when I myself forgot. My children were pillars of strength. John researched new treatments, talked to the doctors, organized my medicines. Anne brought her artistic talent to my healing process. She painted colorful mandalas for me to visualize health returning. She created an illustrated diary where I recorded small daily victories. Peter, now 11 years old, would come to visit me after school and tell me the news. He made me laugh with his preteen stories. And little Michael, only 3 years old, brought a pure joy with his presence. His clumsy drawings, his spontaneous hugs. It was a time of deep learnings. I learned to accept help. I, who had always been so independent. I learned to value each dawn, each sunset, each shared laugh. I learned that strength isn't in doing everything alone, but in allowing yourself to be supported when necessary. After 1.5 years of treatment, came the news we were waiting for: complete remission. The disease had left, taking with it a few pounds, all my hair that later came back completely white, and that feeling of invulnerability we have when health is perfect. But it had left something in its place, a deeper gratitude for life, a more acute awareness of its fragility and beauty. At 60, I made an important decision. Selling Rose's Bakery wasn't easy. It was like handing over a child for raising, but the chain had grown, now with 4 stores, and the administration demanded an energy I no longer had. I sold to a group that promised to maintain the essence, the original recipes, the name. I kept only the first store, the one at the market, more as a living museum of memories than as a business. With the money from the sale, Joseph and I bought a small farm on the outskirts of the city. It was an old dream to have a piece of land, to plant our own fruits and vegetables, to wake up with the birds singing instead of the honking of cars. We renovated the main house, built a spacious kitchen, of course, and a shed for Joseph to tinker with his woodworking projects, a hobby he discovered in retirement. The farm soon became the family meeting point. On Sundays, everyone would come for lunch. John and Beatrice with Michael, Anne and her new partner with Peter, who was now 14 years old. The big table in the yard under the grape arbor was surrounded by generations, by laughter, by stories being shared. At 62, I lost my Joseph. It was quick, unexpected, a massive heart attack while he was pruning the orchard trees. There was no time for goodbyes, for last words. One moment he was there laughing, alive, and the next he had gone. The pain was like nothing I had ever felt, different from all other losses, all other challenges. It was as if half of me had been torn out without anesthesia. In the first months, I would wake up at dawn, searching for his warmth in the bed, for the sound of his breathing. I would talk to him as if he were still there, telling him about my day, asking for advice. At night, lying in the dark, I would go over our story together, from the first cup of coffee in the bakery to the last kiss on the forehead before he went out to the yard that fateful day. It was my family that saved me once again. John and Beatrice temporarily moved to the farm so I wouldn't be alone. Anne came every day, dragged me for short walks, insisted that I eat. Peter and Michael filled the house with their youthful energy, their noise, their pulsing life. Slowly, very slowly, I learned to live in this new normal, not to overcome the loss. We never truly overcome the departure of someone we loved so much, but to carry the pain in a way that didn't crush me, that allowed me to keep walking. I resumed the Sweet New Beginning project with new energy. Now, in addition to the culinary classes, we offered emotional support, career guidance, help to set up small businesses. It was a way to honor Joseph's memory, who always supported my desire to help other women. At 65, I was surprised by an honor. The city decided to award me the title of Distinguished Citizen of Pittsburgh for services rendered to the city through the bakery and the social project. At the ceremony, I looked at the audience and saw faces that had accompanied different phases of my journey. Old bakery customers, students from the social project, suppliers who became friends, and of course, my family. When they handed me the commemorative plaque, I thought of the 17-year-old girl who arrived in Pittsburgh frightened, with nothing but a small suitcase and many dreams. If someone had told me back then that one day I would be honored on that stage, I would have thought it impossible, a fantasy. But life is like that, unpredictable, surprising, generous sometimes when we least expect it. In my speech, I talked about new beginnings, about how life gives us second, third, as many chances as necessary to bloom, about how each fall can be a new beginning, each loss can make room for something new to be born. I didn't explicitly mention my painful past. Some wounds, even scarred, are too intimate to be exposed in public. But I talked about resilience, about transforming pain into purpose, about finding meaning even in the most difficult experiences. I ended by thanking Joseph, my journey companion, who, even physically absent, continued to be my guiding star. To my children who taught me that loving is an act of courage. To my grandchildren who showed me every day that life follows its flow, always renewing, always surprising. And so, my dear friends, I reached 65 years old. No longer a young woman, but also not yet an elderly lady, a woman in the fullness of maturity, carrying marks of time on body and soul, but also the wisdom that only experience brings. A woman who learned, above all, that our story is not defined by the blows we receive, but by the strength with which we rise after each fall. Like the May flowers that gave me my name, I learned to bloom even after the most severe frosts, to find beauty even in the most arid terrains, to offer color and fragrance to the world, even when winter seems to have no end. And here I am now, my dear friends, with my 78 well-lived years, telling my story to you all. How strange it is to look back and see the whole path traveled, like a movie that passes before your eyes. Each wrinkle on my face tells a story. The expression marks around the eyes, from so many shared laughs, the lines on the forehead, from worrying about the children, grandchildren, and now great-grandchildren, the furrows beside the mouth from so many words spoken with love. After 65, life gained a different rhythm. Slower perhaps, but no less intense. The farm continues to be my refuge, my little piece of paradise. I reduced the size of the garden a bit. The back isn't the same anymore, but I still grow my herbs, my flowers, some fruit trees. I wake up with the sun and go to bed early, following the natural rhythm of the body and nature. The loneliness after Joseph's departure gradually transformed into a kind of silent companionship. I still talk to him every night. I tell him about my day, about the family news. Sometimes I swear I feel his presence like a subtle perfume in the air, a comforting warmth. Faith helps me believe that we are not really separated, just in different dimensions of existence. At 68, I received an unexpected invitation that completely changed my routine. Father Anthony from the neighborhood parish sought me out with a challenge. "Mrs. Rose, we need your experience for a new project with community families. He explained that many families were going through difficulties, not only financial, but also emotional and relational. Children without attention, overloaded parents, forgotten elderly. I confess that I hesitated at first. "Father, I'm already old to start new projects," I argued. He smiled. "Mrs. Rose, sometimes the wisdom of a lifetime is exactly what we need to build something new." And so the Coffee with Stories was born, a weekly meeting in the parish hall. It wasn't just about confectionery, although there were always cakes and cookies that I taught how to make. It was about creating a space where different generations could meet, exchange experiences, relearn to truly talk. What started with half a dozen people soon turned into a diverse and vibrant group. There was Mr. Jerome, an 80-year-old gentleman who told war stories that no one knew whether they were true or not. Mrs. Elisa, a retired teacher who always brought a different book to share. Young Charles, who had lost his parents and found in the elderly of the group an extended family. The children from the local orphanage, who came once a month and filled the hall with joy. This project taught me something valuable, that even in old age we can be not just recipients of care, but also agents of transformation. It wasn't just me helping others. It was a genuine exchange where we all had something to offer, something to learn. At 70, I was given a surprise party that left me speechless. Anne and John organized everything in secret, bringing together people from all phases of my life. The ladies who worked with me in the first bakery, old customers who became friends, participants from Coffee with Stories, neighbors, relatives. The sweets table was a tribute to my journey. Each item represented a phase, a memory. It was at this party that John gave me a gift that deeply moved me. A book with the story of my life, made from the recordings we're making now. He and Anne had collected testimonials from people who were part of my journey. Old photos, newspaper clippings about the bakery, emblematic recipes. It was my life bound, preserved for future generations. Leafing through those pages, I saw how a seemingly common life can be extraordinary when seen as a whole. How small decisions, casual encounters, moments of courage or weakness weave a complex and unique tapestry. I realized that my story wasn't just mine, it was part of the story of my family, my community, my time. At 72, I faced a challenge that tested my courage in a way I didn't expect. A group of investors bought several properties in our region with plans to build a luxury condominium. Our farm and neighboring properties were in their sights. There began a huge pressure for us to sell, tempting offers, then veiled threats, mysterious problems with our access to water. Many neighbors gave in, sold their lands. I refused. It wasn't just a piece of land. It was the home I built with Joseph, the place I wanted to spend my last days, a legacy for my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The situation got so difficult that John suggested I give up. "Mom, you're already elderly. You need peace. We can buy a house closer to the city, safer." But something inside me rebelled. It wasn't fair to be pushed out of my little corner of the world because of others' greed. That's when I discovered there was still fire in this old woman's blood. I started to articulate a resistance. I sought out neighbors who hadn't sold yet. We formed a group. We got the support of an environmental NGO. Our area had important springs and forests that should be preserved. A young lawyer, grandson of Mrs. Elisa from Coffee with Stories, helped us pro bono. The fight was long and exhausting. Meetings at City Hall, public hearings, reports in local newspapers. I, who had always been discreet, suddenly found myself giving interviews, participating in demonstrations, confronting businessmen in expensive suits. After almost 2 years of battle, we achieved a partial victory. The condominium project was reduced and redesigned to preserve our area and the springs. Some neighbors were able to stay, others preferred to negotiate with better conditions. I kept my farm, although now I had new neighbors not so far away. This fight taught me that we shouldn't underestimate the elderly, that advanced age doesn't mean passivity or resigned acceptance of injustices, that we can still fight for what we believe in, for what we love, for what is right. At 74, I received news that filled my heart with pride. Peter, my grandson, now 28 years old, had decided to open his own bakery. It wasn't exactly like mine. He had studied molecular gastronomy, modern techniques that I barely understood, but the essence was there. The love for ingredients, respect for traditions, the desire to create special moments through food. He invited me to be a consultant on the project, to share my classic recipes that he wanted to reinterpret with contemporary techniques. We spent entire afternoons in my kitchen with him, noting every detail, every secret, every trick I learned over decades. It was a bridge between generations, between the traditional and the modern, between the past and the future. Peter had married at 25 to Lucy, a lovely girl he met in college. At 26, they gave me my first great-granddaughter, also called Lucy, in honor of her mother. Seeing 4 generations gathered was like witnessing the miracle of life's continuity. When the New Season Bakery opened, Peter chose this name to mark the new era, keeping the roots. I was there cutting the inaugural ribbon. The menu was a delicious mix of tradition and innovation. My cornbread was there, but now with a fermented corn cream and a cinnamon foam. My coconut cookies had become a deconstructed dessert with egg yolk gel, coconut in different textures, and a salted caramel sauce. It was strange and familiar at the same time, like seeing your reflection in moving water. At 75, I faced one of the darkest periods of my old age. A sequence of small strokes left me debilitated for months. I temporarily lost movement on the left side. My speech became slurred, my memory faulty. Suddenly, I, who had always been independent, caregiver to others, found myself dependent on basic care. It was a hard blow to my pride, my identity. I cried many nights from frustration, from fear, from anger. Anger at the body that seemed to betray me, at time that doesn't forgive, at the fragility I had always tried to hide. John and his wife took me to live with them in the city during recovery. Anne came every day to help with physical therapy, but it was my grandson Michael, now 18 years old and studying medicine, who became my greatest support. He applied his newly acquired knowledge with a patience and affection that deeply moved me. "Grandma Rose," he would say, "you've always been strong. Now it's just a different phase of strength. The strength to accept help, to fight for recovery, to not give up." His words echoed in me during the difficult physical therapy sessions. The recovery was slow, with ups and downs. I didn't go back to being as before. Speech still fails sometimes. The left arm doesn't have the same strength, but I regained my independence. I returned to my farm, now with a caregiver who comes 3 times a week, and above all, I regained my will to fully live each day. At 76, I discovered a new world. The internet. It was little Lucy, my great-granddaughter of only 5 years, who insisted that I needed a computer. "Great-grandma, you can see recipe videos from all over the world." Her innocence and enthusiasm convinced me. At first it was scary. So many buttons, so many passwords, so many possibilities. My trembling hands had difficulty with the mouse, my tired eyes with the small letters. But Michael, always patient, increased the letters on the screen, found an easier mouse to handle, created colored cards with basic instructions. Slowly, I ventured into this unknown territory. I started by watching recipe videos. I was fascinated by sweets from other countries, techniques I had never seen. Then I discovered that I could make video calls with distant relatives. I talked to cousins in Oakfield that I hadn't seen in decades. The most surprising was discovering online groups of people my age sharing memories, recipes, life stories. Suddenly, even on days when my body didn't allow me to leave the house, I could be connected to the world, learning, contributing, belonging. It was through the internet that I met Mr. Martin, an 82-year-old gentleman who had been a confectioner in New York his whole life. We started exchanging recipes, then stories, then confidences. A purely virtual friendship, but no less true for it. When he passed away 2 years later, I felt as if I had lost an old childhood friend, although we had never met in person. At 77, I experienced one of the most special moments of my life. My great-granddaughter Lucy being the flower girl at Peter's cousin's wedding. She was already 6 years old and was the flower girl at the wedding of John's niece. It was a beautiful family confusion to see, with so many generations celebrating together. Seeing that girl who grows so fast, full of life and joy, reminds me that the cycle continues, that life always finds a way to renew its promises. But the really special moment of that year was when Peter and his wife announced they would have their second child. The family continued to grow, multiplying, carrying forward not just the genes, but the values, the stories, the recipes that are part of our identity. During a quiet afternoon on the farm, with everyone gathered for Sunday lunch, I looked around and saw my complete work. John, now 57 years old, and with white hair like mine, discussing politics with his nephews. Anne, at 55, still creative and vibrant, teaching little Lucy to draw. Peter, at 32, at the height of adult life, preparing desserts that were, at the same time, tribute and reinvention of my recipes. Michael, at 21, almost a doctor, taking care of everyone with that protective way he inherited from grandfather Joseph. At that moment, I felt a deep peace. Life had been hard on me in many moments. It had given me blows that seemed impossible to overcome, but it had also given me priceless gifts, true love, wonderful children, the chance to see my family grow, multiply, flourish. The frightened girl from Oakfield had come a long way and now could look back with gratitude and forward with hope. And so I reached 78 years, the age I have today, as I tell my story to you. Each day I thank for the dawn, for the hot coffee in the cup, for the birds singing in the yard. I thank for the small joys, a surprise visit from the grandchildren, a new recipe that Michael shows me on the internet, a sunny afternoon on the porch with a good book. I learned that aging isn't just losing strength, agility, loved ones. It's also gaining wisdom, patience, the ability to value the essential. It's learning to accept help without losing dignity, to adapt without losing essence, to say goodbye without losing gratitude for each moment lived. My hands now shake when decorating a cake. My steps are slower through the yard. My eyes need stronger glasses to read the recipes. But my heart remains young. My curiosity about life remains alive. My ability to love remains intact. The girl who once suffered abuse, who was betrayed by those who should protect her, who thought about giving up on life, found not just survival, but fullness, not despite the pain, but in a certain way through it. Because each challenge overcome was building the woman, the mother, the grandmother, the great-grandmother that I am today. Looking back, I see that my life has been like a complex recipe, with sweet and bitter ingredients, moments of high heat and moments of low heat, periods of fermentation and periods of growth. And the final result, even with some imperfections, is something that fills me with pride. What I've learned, my dear friends, is that we all have scars. Some carry them visible on the skin, others hidden in the soul. But it's these marks that tell our story of survival, of resilience, of humanity. We shouldn't be ashamed of them, nor allow them to define our entire being. They are just chapters of a much larger story. The story of a life lived in its fullness, with all its lights and shadows. May my story serve as comfort for those going through difficult times. May it be proof that it's possible to transform pain into purpose, trauma into strength, abandonment into the ability to love. May each one who hears me know that they are not alone, that there is always hope, that the sun always rises again, even after the darkest night. And so, my dear friends, I end my account, an ordinary life that became extraordinary, not for great deeds, but for the courage to rise after each fall, for the decision to love despite the wounds, for the choice to build beauty where others only saw destruction. May God bless each one of you. May you find strength in your struggles, joy in the small things, love in unexpected places. And always remember, it doesn't matter where we came from. What matters is where we're going. And as long as there is life, there is always time to start over, to bloom, to write a new chapter in our story. With all my love and prayers, Mrs. Rose. Please like this video and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. Comment where you're watching from. I'll read all your comments.